Welcome to the Sabbath School Rescue Podcast with your host, Buster Swoopes and Michael Campbell. This week in preparation for Sabbath October 18th, we look at Lesson 3, Memorials of Grace. Join us as we journey with the children of Israel as they cross the Jordan River.
The Sabbath School Rescue Podcast is hosted by Michael Campbell and Buster Swoopes at the Adventist Learning Community. Together, we love learning and have 18 years of pastoral experience, and now we have the privilege to dig deeper into the study.
All right, here we are, Michael, Lesson 3, Memorials of Grace, and our memory text is Joshua 4, verses 23 to 24, and this is actually the ESV. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples on the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. And we're going to be talking about not just the miraculous event that took place there at the Jordan River, but also how memorials help us to remember the mighty acts that God is doing in our lives today. So, Michael, take us there to Sunday's lesson. Tell us a little bit about crossing the Jordan.
Sure. So, this is this pivotal moment that they hadn't been able to reach for how long, during the wilderness, and now they're finally here. And this is the turning point. And so you see the Ark of the Covenant is there. They prepare for this very special occasion. So,
Right.
and so they are in the midst of all of that process. So, and it would be interesting to actually have been able to go back in time and just kind of imagine, to witness, to see. And of course, right before they go over, they camp on the one side of Jordan on Shittim, which is the same place that was mentioned before in last week's lesson. And so it's a time of preparation. And then when they see the actual Ark of the Covenant, they know that that is the sign to begin to move forward. And so, in fact, there's even a special distance they have to have. So it's so sacred. They don't want to desecrate it in any way possible. They want to keep it holy and preserve it. And of course, the part that there's a spiritual work, not just physically crossing the Jordan, the act of walking and going through. But this is a spiritual moment for God's people as they're preparing. And so part of recognizing what's happening is a spiritual preparation for the journey that is at hand. So, and part of this is an echo of Numbers 14, which is what's referred to in this lesson here, Numbers 14, verses 41 to 44. Where Moses reminds them, why are you disobeying God's commands? You will not succeed. In other words, if you're not spiritually ready, you're going to fail. You're going to get defeated by all these people that are there. So the most important thing isn't, again, a numerical strength or anything like that. It's spiritual, it's heart preparation. And that's what's going to turn the day for them to be able to actually successfully be able to cross the Jordan. So, which brings us, once they're across, it's only through the power of God, the living God, in fact, the living God of wonders. So take us there, Buster.
Yeah, so this continues on Joshua 3, 6 through 17. And Michael, the more and more I read this, the more I realized it's not just a crossing, it's more like a worship service, if you will.
Yeah, it
Verse
does seem
6.
that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So Joshua chapter 3, verse 6. Then Joshua spoke to the priest saying, take up the Ark of the Covenant, cross over before the people. I'm going to jump down here, verse 8. You shall command the priest to bear the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. And so you see them standing there, and check this out. Verse 9. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear, so hear and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you will know the living God is among you, that he without fail drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and Jebusites, every ite among their sight, right?
There's a lot of them.
And so verse 14, so it was when the people set out from their camp to cross the Jordan that the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, it says that they were standing in the midst of that water. In verse 16, that the waters which came down upstream stood still and rose up in a heap very far away. And It's a beautiful moment. Verse 17, which is the last verse of this section. Then the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. And so Joshua was given some commands of what to do, and he did them along with the children of Israel, and God was praised that day. I love this, how it says that in verse 5, there's this Hebrew word, nephilat, and it's called miracles and wonders. So this is the God of the miracles and wonders that he had done, hence the title of this Monday's lesson, which actually ties now into Tuesday's lesson. When God does wondrous and miraculous things, we're called to remember. Take us there, Michael.
Yeah. So this is probably my favorite part of the lesson because they're in the riverbed, right? It is
Man.
in a process. And God asked them to build a memorial. And so that is what's taking place. And so there's a couple different aspects to this here. First of all, is that they choose 12 men, one from each tribe. So there's sort of like a symbolism that's taking place as this is unfolding. And so they have to go, each of them, and grab a rock, a big rock. And they number themselves according to the tribes of Israel, and then they bring them back to Joshua. And so where the priests were, there would become a monument that would stand as a testimony to what God has done for them. And so this to worship, as you called it, going in and through the riverbed, that they will always remember how God had led them and the covenant that they had with God. And so this is important to really understand this context. And it's at the heart of the story. And I think it's important that you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why would God do this? And I think there is several different reasons, but most of all, I think there is a sacred, you mentioned, Buster, how this is an act of worship, right? So they're
Right.
blowing the ark and they're singing and they're doing all these things. It's basically a worship service, but remembering the past or how God has led is also equally just as much an act of worship. And that's what's taking place. They're remembering, okay, God, you brought us here. You promised to bring us here. You fulfilled your promise. And we're worshiping you. We want to always remember that you fulfilled your covenant. You fulfilled your promise. And so we are part of this. And we do need to be reminded. And that's the other part of this is that whether it's our personal lives or in church history, which of course I enjoy that part quite a bit, as you know, Buster,
Yes.
that there's moments where it's good to remember. And we do this with relationships. We remember birthdays and anniversaries. We're like, okay, that's really important. And so whatever it is, you let the people in your life know, okay, those relationships matter to me. And that's why we remember birthdays and anniversaries. Same thing with God. It's good for us to remember those moments where God has done something in our lives, to be able to remember, okay, God, I got to a really difficult spot in my life and I didn't think there was any way out and you brought me through this. And there's different ways that we can do that. We don't have to set up 12 stones in our backyard to be able to remember, but there's a lot of other different ways that we can do that. As a church, we do that as well. We remember, here's the points where God has definitely led, and we can see very clearly his providential leading in our extent. That's why I hear what you said. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
Buster. I wasn't gonna hold quick in this one. We go to these places to remember. We do heritage tours. We go to the Willie Miller Farm. We go to the Washington, New Hampshire Church. We go to these different places, wherever it might be. On the West Coast, there's some great heritage sites too, and literally lots of different places. But we go to remember. Okay, and like, wow, that's amazing. I can't believe I intervened and did that in that way. And so remembering is very much a sacred act of worship, which if remembering is a good thing, what's up with forgetfulness, Buster?
Yeah. So there on Wednesday's lesson, we're called to remember, but it doesn't mean that we always do. Several times in my life where I've forgotten. I was at a portion at the hospital yesterday. We had a special presenter who came, and her daughter is just recently graduated, is working in a school ISD, and is on her own for the first time. And she has something that great. It's called a grace jar. And so every time that God does something miraculous in our life, she writes it down on a little tiny piece of paper and puts it in the jar. And whenever she has moments of doubt, she goes through and just picks out one and reads it and remembers and puts it back in. I'm like, man, How special is that, right? And so
Yeah,
I think my family's going to get one of those going because it's so important not to forget. Yet we do.
it's a
So
great idea. I love that.
yes. So Joshua 4 verses 20 through 24, they set up
Mhm.
12 stones, which they took out of the Jordan, and they set it up as a remembrance. It's almost like a memorial, as you just shared a little while ago, Michael. But
Yeah,
verse 24 says, this the reason why they set it up, that all the peoples on the of the earth may know the hand of the Lord that is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. But what's so important to realize here is that the lesson leads us through Judges to Psalms to Deuteronomy and back to Psalm 45:17 says, I will make your name remembered in all the generations. Therefore, the people shall praise you forever and ever. So God is putting this moment up here. He wants them to remember, to remember and to be remembered. Judges
right,
8:34. Thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. So just because we're called to remember doesn't mean we always do. And that's why I love how Christ put it when the people are looking for a sign and a miracle. He says, you wicked and perverse generation, you're always looking for the sign. But the
yeah,
true sign and the miracle and the change that God is actually looking after is a change that doesn't happen outside of us. It's not the parting the Red Sea, it's actually the parting of our hearts surrendered to Him. And that's why it's so important, and I love how our lesson segues to 1 Corinthians 11:24 through 25, talking about the communion ceremony. This do in remembrance of me, to remember my body, which is broken for you, and also couples that with John 14, verse 26. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all things that I said to you. And so this is
yeah,
why it's so important for us to surrender so we can remember. And I think it's very timely and fitting that we end with what the lesson ends on Wednesday's portion, which is Life Sketches, page 196, a quote from Sister White. And it says here, it says, we will surely lose the motivation to carry out our mission in the future. And this is the actual quote. We have nothing to fear for the future, except we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and his teaching and
mm,
our past history. And so
I
that
like
is
it.
so important. And recognizing this, that is remembering it's not living in the past, but it's
Yeah,
allowing the past to inform our future, of recognizing that the God
mm,
of our past is still the God of our present and the God of our future. And so, Michael, that now leads us to beyond the Jordan. Take us there.
mm. I mean, what a powerful quote. One of my favorites. So
Yes.
the beyond the Jordan. So we're reminded in Psalm 66, verse 6, he turned the sea into dry land. They went through the river on foot. There we were rejoicing. And so it's a reminder that this is a sacred place, a sacred space. And after that, it becomes the fulfillment of the promise that God had said, I'll make this a land of milk and honey. This will be your land. The promise is coming true. Before they get there, it is interesting to me that later on, the Jordan has some very special significance for salvation history and God's people. First, we are reminded in Joshua chapter yeah, Joshua chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. I'm sorry, I got the wrong one.
Okay.
Chapter 3,
There we
verses 16 and 17. Okay, I got the right one. And it refers to Jesus' baptism, which takes place where? In the Jordan. And did Jesus need to be baptized? No, but
No.
it wasn't a sinner, but through his example. And this became a profound spiritual experience as well. And so, in a way, you can even think of the children of Israel having almost like a symbolic baptism. Here they are entering into God's promised land, but going through the water, going through the river. It becomes very sacred spiritual space. Mark chapter 1, verse 9 says the same thing. Jesus was baptized by John in the Jordan. So this is
Mhm.
what's happening. We see that there is this rich symbolism, and after the Jordan is the rest of their lives. It's the beginning of a new chapter, a new era for the children of Israel, and that in itself is really quite profound, I think.
Amen. Michael, that reminds me of his baptism was I was talking to one of our chaplains yesterday. We had
Yeah.
a patient who requested baptism. The
Oh,
doctors had given them less than 5 days to live.
oh my God.
So, and they said,
What did you do?
Yeah, and so they said, I've been attending church all this time with my wife, and now I want to get baptized. And the doctor's like, well, you're not allowed to really leave the facility. We don't advise it. And so the chaplain prayed about it, and he came in and he kind of did a sprinkling. And I know we believe in baptism by immersion, but I explained to him this. I believe that just as the death of Christ was a substitutionary death, I really do believe that. I believe that baptism of Christ for all those of us who believe was actually a substitutionary baptism as well for those who don't have the opportunity to do so. And so when Romans tells us in chapter 6 that we were baptized into the baptism of Christ, well, I believe that Christ actually makes that provision for us. And so I think it's very symbolic that it's there in the Jordan and recognizing what Christ once again has done in the past, what he's doing in the present, and what he will continue to do for us to be saved.
Absolutely. And I think it's the message of salvation as we look through from Rahab last week to these memorials of grace this week, as we see all of this, God's in the business of saving people, and he wants to remind us. And sometimes, he doesn't expect perfection. He just wants our hearts. He wants us to do the best that we can, and frankly
Amen.
might just be that very, to them is their immersion, not as much as they can do, but
Yes, yes.
it's a decision that they made for Jesus Christ. I love that. It just is so beautiful, Buster. So,
Yes.
well, you've been listening to the Sabbath School Rescue podcast, and we love taking a deeper dive each week into God's Word and sharing with you. And until next week, we're your hosts, Sue,
And Swoopes,
and we're signing out.
signing out.
As we wrap up, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, the Adventist Learning Community, a ministry of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists.
You can join us each week by subscribing on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Also, make sure you share it to as many people as possible. And be sure to give us feedback by rating our podcast and go to our website, sabbathschoolrescue.org, for each weekly episode.